Hey everybody, welcome back to History Student Reacts. Today we'll be watching the Second Punic War Part 2 by Oversimplified. Now yesterday we reacted to Part 1 where we saw the build-up to the Second Punic War and Hannibal's crossing of the Alps, one of his greatest achievements, but we still have a lot to go, and in this video we'll be getting into Hannibal's time in Italy. Now, like I said yesterday, every time I upload these videos to YouTube, they get claimed by Oversimplified, so if you'd like to see my future Oversimplified reactions, then please check out my Patreon, it is linked down below. These reactions I'm putting up publicly, but other Oversimplified reactions I think I'll upload for channel members and patrons. I'm specifically thinking about doing his French Revolution or Napoleonic Wars videos next. Anyway, with all of that out of the way, let's jump right into this reaction.
This video was made possible by Incogni. Use code Oversimplified in the link below for an exclusive 60% off an annual Incogni plan.
Nice.
Also, make sure to grab our Roman Consul U2s before it's too late. Don't make me mention it a third time, or I'll you-know-what.
Uh-oh. Part 2.
Hannibal's army had survived its famous crossing of the Alps, and he was now in Italy.
Right.
With Hannibal's arrival, the Roman consul Scipio hit the ground running. In typical Roman fashion, he marched his army straight at the enemy.
Right, and as we said last time, crossing the Alps, I mean, Hannibal has done it, but he lost a large chunk of his army. Leaving Iberia, he had about 100,000 men. By the time he made it to the other side of the Alps, he had, I think it was about 25,000. Now, he didn't lose them all in the Alps crossing, but throughout the entire process, he has lost about 75% of his army. So, he has to make it worth it, right? Why did we cross the Alps? Well, to get this advantage on the Romans, so you need to start winning some battles. I mean, if you go all the way from Iberia over the Pyrenees, through southern Gaul, over the Alps, only to get stomped by the Romans, then that was all a big waste of time, right? So you need to really make that crossing worth it, and I mean, of course, Hannibal will, but at this moment, we don't know exactly what's going to happen. I mean, he could have just done all of this for nothing, and that would be probably one of the biggest disappointments of all time. That'd be a massive flop, but of course that is not how it's going to go.
And Hannibal began preparing for his first combat with Rome on Italian soil. Before the battle, Hannibal wanted to inspire his men, so he staged a gladiatorial death match between captured Celt prisoners, with the winner getting prizes and freedom. He then explained that the whole thing was a metaphor. A metaphor? For what? You! These warriors are you! You're trapped in Italy with no escape. Your only choice now is to fight and win.
True.
What about the dead guy? That's you if you don't win. And the prizes? That's what you stand to gain by winning. And the fact that I've soiled myself in all this excitement?
Huh?
No, that's not part of the metaphor. Okay. Hannibal also smashed in the head of a goat. Again, for inspiration.
Yeah, classic. You know, we're in the ancient world. We love some animal sacrifice. Of course, the Romans would do that. The Carthaginians, sometimes even a little bit of human sacrifice. The Romans did like human sacrifice, but we get some of that as well. But animal sacrifice, especially common.
Scipio, on the other hand, now arriving in the area, opted for the more classic route of a rousing pre-battle speech. Look at them, men. Weak, starved by the Alps, while we are the strongest military in the world.
Right, and I mean, think about this from the Romans' perspective. Now, we talked about how Hannibal arriving in Italy was a little startling, but despite that, his army is a fraction of what it once was. The men have been weakened by their crossing of the Alps, and they're coming up against the Romans, right? And the Romans have supreme confidence in themselves, of course. And so going into this battle, they're thinking, yeah, we've got this. We've got these weakened, starved, freezing Carthaginians with, some Celtic warriors that they've picked up versus the Roman legions. I mean, they're not going to stand a chance, or at least, I believe this was a more cavalry-focused battle, right? But the Romans, they think they're going to sweep the floor with Hannibal and be done with this whole thing.
This will be easy, like 10,000 horse-sized ducks fighting a baby-sized baby. It'll be like Mike Tyson in his prime, kicking a baby.
Oh.
A tug of war between 10 sumo wrestlers and help me out here, Ralph. A baby, sir? Yes, yes, that's it. A baby. The point is, there is absolutely no possible way we could lose a battle this easy.
Uh-oh.
So, if everybody's ready, on my
Yeah,
mark.
surely we could lose this battle. Yeah.
The Battle of Ticinus was over almost as soon as it had begun, as the Romans found themselves completely outmatched by Hannibal's famed, lightning-fast Numidian cavalry.
Yeah, those Numidians. These are one of the premier cavalry forces of the ancient world. I mean, you think of a couple names when you think of sort of ancient cavalry, and the Numidians are absolutely one of them, famed for their skill on horseback. They were a frightening force to face, and they absolutely gave it to the Romans in this battle.
A key element in Hannibal's devastating double envelopment tactics.
Yeah, and so we just sort of talked about the Numidian cavalry and Hannibal's envelopment tactics. This is one that he will use repeatedly to great success, but also the loyalty. Now, we talked about this last time, right? Hannibal had grown up with the army, they trusted him, etc., etc. But after that march through the Alps, and I made this point last time, we talked about Mao's Long March, when sort of a similar thing happened, he did lose most of his men, making his way from Iberia to the Italian peninsula. But those that survived, though they had been a little weakened and hungry and freezing in the immediate aftermath of the crossing, they were now hardened veterans, and their loyalty had only been compounded, right? This feeling of, well, if we can make it through the Alps with Hannibal and we can beat we can do anything, right? Hannibal has already led us to success against all odds, right? That's what it feels like. And so now his men, those men that marched with him all this way, are extremely loyal to Hannibal.
In the chaos, Scipio was wounded. Thankfully, according to some ancient writers, his handsome 17-year-old son, Scipio the Younger, saw his father fall. Scipio the Younger supposedly saved his father, and in the process, earned himself a lot of daddy's kisses. The Romans...
I mean, highlight the word supposedly. This is the thing with a lot of ancient history, especially we can look at Roman history, because that's what we're talking about here. You know, the historians, sometimes they like to tell fact, sometimes they like to add in a little bit of fiction. They weren't just telling history, they were telling stories with morals and archetypes. And so, a story like this, oftentimes the Romans would take these great figures of history and just add in some heroic deeds in their past, or maybe they heard a rumor, and so we don't really know if Scipio the Younger, as we'll call him for now, did that. I think there's some evidence that he was there. Do we know exactly what he did in the battle? I would say no, you know. Could this have happened? Sure, it could have happened. Did it happen? We don't know.
Ended up fleeing the area, destroying the bridge behind them as they went. For a nation so overtly confident in victory, believing Hannibal to be an easy kill, the Romans found themselves running away with their tail between their legs.
This is true, but, and though this was a Carthaginian victory, this was not necessarily a major defeat for the Romans. This was not devastating. Rome did not yet find its confidence harmed. They still had a lot of men to go through. They still felt pretty confident that if they were able to take on Hannibal, especially in a sort of more infantry-centric battle, that they would be able to defeat him, right? The Romans are sort of feeling like, all right, we might have lost that one, but we were caught off guard and we weren't ready, and the whole long list of excuses. Basically, you know, we talked last time about Hannibal arrives in Italy. This is a little concerning. You know, now we are directly at risk, the people of the Roman Republic, and how that fear would sort of grow over time, but we're still at a pretty low level, right? A lot of Romans are still not yet too concerned about Hannibal. Now, he's definitely a serious and real threat, but they're still thinking that they can relatively easily beat him.
It was humiliating. And you know who thought so as well? The Celts. They began flocking to Hannibal's side, just as he'd hoped. Even Celtic troops fighting for Rome in the Roman camp began to reconsider.
Yeah, and once again, this is another common thread throughout the Second Punic War of, we've already seen Hannibal gathering some Celtic or Gallic allies. He used a bit of intimidation earlier on, but a lot of these people, they have not really been integrated into the territory of Rome, right? They've been conquered by the Republic, but they don't really feel like they are part of the Roman Republic. They've not been under Roman domination for that long at all. And so, when the momentum starts to shift and Hannibal shows them, we can defeat the Romans. We, the Carthaginians, you should side with us. A lot of these Gauls, a lot of these peoples who don't feel that much allegiance to the Roman Republic will start to say, you know what? Let's go with the Carthaginians, right? We can liberate ourselves from Roman rule.
Man, I'm thinking we should try to join Hannibal. I hear you. Maybe we should bring him a gift. What do you think he'd like?
I mean, I think I have a good guess.
Oh, I know. Hey, Hannibal, we want to join your side and we brought you a present. A gift? For me? I hope it's Roman heads. Oh, please be Roman heads. How did you know?
Oh,
Running
nice.
away from Hannibal was humiliating enough, but having dozens of Romans beheaded in the night, now that's embarrassing.
Yeah.
Ticinus had been a relatively small battle,
Right.
but the psychological impact it had early on was huge, and it was only just a taste of what Hannibal was capable of.
Yeah, I mean, look, like I said, in terms of importance, we're still talking relatively minor compared to what's to come, and it certainly was humiliating, and there were psychological impacts, but compared to, once again, what's to come, it's all relatively minor, and the Romans are still feeling like they can defeat Hannibal, right? Like I said, that sort of fear is creeping up, but it just hasn't reached, sort of that point yet, where people start to really get concerned about themselves and sort of the Roman Republic as a whole. They feel like we had this loss. It's humiliating. The Roman pride is certainly wounded, but it's not shattered. They're still ready to fight another day, and, they're not... We're going to get to a point in this conflict where the Romans are very afraid of Hannibal. We're not at that point yet.
Despite the shocking initial loss, however, Rome still didn't seem to fully understand the danger posed by the monster now loose in their territory.
Exactly.
The
Exactly. And eventually that is how they'll see Hannibal, as a monster loose in their territory, in the heartland of their country. That's how they'll view him. They do not yet view him like that.
Was full of excuses.
Right.
It's those traitorous Celts. That's why we lost. Yeah, and it was a cavalry battle.
Yup.
Wait until Hannibal faces our almighty legions.
Exactly.
And our consul was bald. Once he faces our other fully follicled consul, then he'll really pee his pants. That other consul, Longus, had been in the south all this time, preparing to invade Africa. He had seen some success, even capturing Malta. But then he heard the news. Hannibal's in Italy? And I'm being ordered home? But I was gonna be the big boy. I was gonna invade Carthage and win the war. Well, you can be a big boy at home. No! Does somebody need a nap, sir? No! 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 And so Longus brought his army on the long journey north. When he arrived in the area to decisively neutralize Hannibal, the two consuls joined their forces together, creating a double consular army. But the two consuls weren't exactly on the same page. Having a nice rest there, old man? I'm wounded, Longus. Pathetic. You don't understand. He's more dangerous than we thought. Maybe for you. Whoops. Listen, we can't just march straight at him like we normally do.
That is a fateful piece of advice, and this will start a really important trend throughout the Second Punic War of Rome being Rome, and these Roman generals being supremely overconfident, feeling like they can defeat Hannibal, no matter how many times Hannibal has beaten them, marching right in, and then getting absolutely pummeled by Hannibal. Now, in this case, Scipio is presenting the other side of the argument, to his credit, he has learned from his loss, and he is saying the unpopular opinion, which is, now, wait a minute, we got to be cautious, we can't charge right in there. But like I said, this is the unpopular opinion. It's going to take a long, long time for Rome to learn this, and even when they do they never truly grasp onto it, right? Eventually they will change their strategy with Hannibal, but they will keep making the same mistake over and over again, being far too overconfident, charging straight in, and being defeated. And Longus is, one of the best examples of that, but we have many examples to draw from.
We need to train our men through the winter, and we'll try again in spring. Sorry, I don't take advice from a bowling ball. Hey, I'll kick your ass, Longus.
And we talked about last time meaning the first Punic War videos, how Rome was a culture very oriented towards glory, particularly military glory, and that's what a lot of these guys are looking for. That is one of the reasons why they are so aggressive, is that, they want to earn that military glory for themselves, either because it's going to help them move up through the ranks, build their political position at home, or, say, if they're a consul, you've got 1 year to be consul, you need to get as much of that military glory in your year as possible. So that is a big motivating factor here. I'm going to go back a couple seconds because I interrupted the video again.
Sorry, I don't take advice from a bowling ball. Hey, I'll kick your ass, Longus. Any day now. I'm coming. Just you wait.
Brutal.
Oh, Scipio, you feeble old man. Scipio was apparently quite cautious after his recent encounter with Hannibal.
Fairly so.
Longus, typically Roman,
right,
couldn't wait to give Hannibal a swirl.
Exactly.
So who would get their way? Well, when two consuls joined their forces, it turned out the Romans had an interesting system in place.
You could call it interesting. This is certainly one way of running an army with two people at its head. I would say a pretty terrible way, but this is how the Romans did it.
They would each take turns being the one in charge.
Right.
Consul 1 would lead one day, then Consul 2 the next.
And this is sort of how the entire Roman executive ran, right, with the two consuls. The idea... Now, look, it's better if your consuls are working together, but the system is kind of structured around one consul doing something, and then another consul gets a chance. And in this case, in the case of leading an army, that was to the extreme, right? One consul one day, the next day, the other consul. I think these days we would not favor this type of leadership, even if you have multiple executives. The idea is that they come to decisions collaboratively, but the Romans saw it a little differently. They said, yeah, we do have two executives here, or two generals here, but, sure, maybe it's better if they collaborate, but they're going to do their own thing on their own day. And so when you get in a situation where you have two generals who have very different perspectives, as we do here, as you can imagine, and as you're about to see, that can cause a lot of problems.
Back and forth, back and forth. As you can imagine, when the two consuls didn't agree, things didn't go so well.
Exactly.
In this case, due to Scipio's injury, Longus probably assumed even more command than normal.
Yeah.
Hannibal had Celtic spies in the Roman camp. He fully understood the Roman system and Longus's hot-headed nature.
Oh yeah. I said this last time, but if there's one thing Hannibal's great at, it is playing those mind games and understanding his opponent. Perhaps because, we talked about how Hamilcar and Hannibal had maybe decided to be a little more Roman with their approach to sort of military affairs. Hannibal absolutely understands the Romans, and he understands these generals in particular. He knows they're aggressive. He knows they're glory hungry. They're seeking that military glory. They're seeking power. They're seeking a quick victory, and he will use this against them every time.
And he knew he could exploit it. For goodness sake! What's wrong, sir? I'm trying to order some pizza, but I keep getting fed all these personalized ads about being a hothead.
Oh.
I'm not a hothead, am I?
I think we've got an ad coming.
Look at this. Butt insurance? Who would buy butt insurance? Yeah, that sounds really stupid. Sir, it seems like a lot of data brokers have collected data on you. They could sell that data to Hannibal. What? But don't worry, because you can get rid of that data with today's wonderful sponsor, Incogni. Hooray! I've been getting at you for some time to protect your personal data online. But you're a nimwit,
No.
aren't you? You didn't do it, did you?
Damn.
Typical. And now would you look at that? Tons of data brokers have collected a heck of a lot of your personal data.
True.
And might sell it to third parties like advertisers or insurance companies without you even knowing. Ever wonder where Sally from the Butt Insurance Company got your name, number, address, social security number, and favorite color from? Probably a dirty data broker. We could painstakingly contact the hundreds of brokers that have our data and politely ask them to delete it. That process would only take the average human about 3,000 years. And that's why you need Incogni. I was shocked to find how many data brokers Incogni had tracked, potentially selling my data. But all I had to do was create an Incogni account, give them permission to work on my behalf, then sit back and let them do all the hard work for me. And since these data brokers don't stop there, Incogni will continuously work to keep my data safe with an annual plan. So if you want to protect your personal data too, go to incogni.com/oversimplified to get an exclusive 60% off an annual Incogni plan.
Nice.
That's incogni.com/.
You know, we gotta let the ad run through, right? It's a
And
new
as
video.
always, you'll be supporting my channel. So thank you. Now, where were we? Oh yeah. Roman heads, a double consular army, and a hothead. Hannibal needed to keep smashing the Romans in battle in order to maintain the loyalty of the Celts. And so he was eager to fight another battle. The combined Roman force possibly outnumbered him, so he carefully crafted a clever trap, and he made sure to spring it while Longus was still in charge. The plan began with his army getting an early night's sleep. All right, boys, time for lights out. Sorry, but we got a big day ahead of us. Tomorrow, we're gonna massacre the Romans.
Oh, how pleasant.
Good night, boys. Dream of revenge. Gorzog, send out the cavalry. That night, Hannibal's Numidian cavalry made their way over to the Roman camp, arriving.
I mean, this whole battle, a great example of Hannibal's schemes. And, you know, we'll see this every battle. Hannibal's favorite is some kind of flanking or encirclement maneuver. That's sort of the old reliable, but in order to get your enemy in position, Hannibal will pull a variety of tricks and schemes on the Romans pretty constantly in most of the battles we're going to see, and this whole thing is a good example of that.
Just before dawn. Hey, Romans! Wakey, wakey! What the? What's going on? Hey, Longus! Your butt smells like a butt. Does not! Scipio! Awaken the troops! Longus, these playground insults are clearly meant to lure you out. Well, it's working! Send out the troops! Longus, it's clearly a trap. And I'm falling for it! Send out the troops! Hey guys, wake up. You're heading out for battle. What? But we haven't had breakfast. We're skipping breakfast! I don't think you can do that. As the Romans...
Once again, Hannibal very expertly takes advantage of that Roman glory-seeking nature, especially with Longus in charge. It doesn't take much. He goes up, you know, he sort of goads them out of their camp, and Longus, you know, who knows? Maybe he was totally blind to it. Maybe he was like, yeah, well, I know there's something going on, but we can defeat them easily. Whatever it was, he totally falls into it. Longus is like, all right, we're going for it, men. You know what we're gonna do? We're gonna march straight at them. Genius. Classically Roman.
Hurried out of camp. The Numidians began luring them back to the Carthaginian camp, where these gentle angels were just awakening from their slumber. Eat up, boys. We're having pancakes. While the Carthaginians were enjoying their hearty breakfast, the starving Romans were still on their way. Hurry up! We have to catch those Numidians. Hey, why have you stopped marching?
Yeah, it sort of gives you an idea of how important a few things are. I mean, one, logistics, even having food and supplies, and this is something the Carthaginians will struggle with. Two, sort of camp morale, you know what I mean? Keeping people's spirits high. And three, sort of, you know, organization, routine, making sure people have time to get the things done they need to get done, like, I don't know, eating breakfast. as we can see in this example, the Romans, they're probably hungry, they're probably groggy, morale is probably pretty low, maybe not generally, but right now, at this moment, no one's particularly happy to be woken up to immediately march towards the enemy, and Hannibal is bringing the Romans right to him. And, maybe Longus and the Romans think, well, that's how we're going to beat him. We go right to him, we defeat him easily, but this is exactly what Hannibal wants.
Longus, there's a freezing river in front of us. Well, get your gluteus maximus in the water. All right, boys, time to lather up. This oil will insulate you from the cold. It also smells like lavender.
Wow.
There's the Carthaginian camp. Get ready to fight, men. Sir? I think the water from the river is beginning to ice over. I can't move. Oh, I'm sorry. You thought war would be fun? Sitting around a nice hot campfire playing Truth or Dare with your friends? Welcome to the real world! Truth. Who do you like? Sharon. Hey, look guys. The Romans are here. Having perfectly orchestrated events so that his enemy was cold, tired, and hungry, while his men were well rested and covered in oil. When the two sides engaged one another, the Romans were in no condition to fight. And the cherry on top, the previous night, Hannibal had sent out an elite force of men led by his brother to go and hide behind a bush.
Like I said, Hannibal loves a good flanking or encircling maneuver. It is his absolute favorite thing. Also taking an infantry or a cavalry force, hiding them in a bush or a forest somewhere, and then having them provide the flanking maneuver. I mean, just one of his favorite things. He loved to do it. So here we're getting a sort of classic Hannibal move, right? He used his scheming trickery, his understanding of the Roman mind, to lure the Romans towards him, where they're not prepared for this battle, and exactly, the cherry on top is that he also has a bit of an ambush waiting for them.
They suddenly sprung out, encircling the exhausted Romans, who were then cut to pieces. Once again, Hannibal's superior cavalry and double envelopment tactics had flummoxed the Romans.
Classic.
But the key word at Trebia was control. Hannibal used his intel on the enemy and the environment of the battlefield to carefully control the conditions of battle.
Yeah, exactly. And, when you're dealing with these military affairs, it is extremely important to get any sort of advantage over your enemy. And control of the environment, control of the battlefield, these are extremely important things to have, and they can give you massive, massive advantages. And Hannibal is very cognizant of this. He also knows how to read his opponent very well, right? So he is extremely well suited to these kinds of battles. He knows how to draw the Romans in. He knows how to set battles up on his own terms. And this leads to very many victories. This is only one of many to come.
Getting lots of little advantages for himself that paved the way to success. And concealing troops for an ambush? All of these things are what make Hannibal the genius he's remembered as today. As for Longus, he managed to escape the battlefield with a small number of troops.
In this sort of Roman perspective, broadly, and this is very generalized, but we can see through the character of Longus, is sort of, well, we don't need to worry about all these little advantages because our men are so strong and so well disciplined that we can march in there and fight face to face and win. As we're seeing, that does not exactly work out, at least not against Hannibal. Now, we will see a couple, one Roman general in particular, who does have a different view of things. I think we'll get to him at some point. But a lot of these Roman generals are running on this assumption that they can march in there, fight, and if they're just strong and disciplined enough, they'll win the battle. That is not what's happening here.
Disgraced, he didn't want the Senate to find out what had happened, and he began obscuring communications back to Rome.
Bro.
Longus, where have you been? We've been looking for you. Nowhere in particular. Longus, 30,000 men are missing. Do you know where they are? They're taking a bath. 30,000 men? All in a bath? Yes. Longus, what's under that rug?
Uh-oh.
Aurora Borealis? Aurora Borealis? Oh, well, that's my consul ship over. Good luck with Hannibal. Bye. Trebia had been a disaster for the Romans. And as even more Celts began flocking to Hannibal, Rome largely lost its control over Cisalpine Gaul.
Yeah, and as we said last time, Cisalpine Gaul is this rather newly conquered territory. You know, it had only been recently acquired by Rome. This is why so many of the Gallic tribes living there did not feel that much allegiance to the Roman Republic, were willing to go over to Hannibal, though Hannibal will find allies up and down the Italian peninsula, and so Hannibal was able to wrestle it from the hands of the Romans sort of relatively quickly. Now, it's not like this was now like Carthaginian territory. Hannibal is still basically cut off from Carthage. He is one man and his men sort of marching around Italy. This is still a risky position, but he has basically destroyed Roman control over the region.
Rome. Complacency turned to alarm. Hannibal had outwitted them on their own soil and inflicted a costly defeat. But with that, Scipio and Longus' terms as consul were over. They were replaced with two new consuls, Servilius and Flaminius. The Romans may now have begun to realize the trouble they were in and the genius Hannibal had shown in invading Italy.
Yeah, I mean, after a loss like that fear we were talking about, that Roman concern, that anxiety, it does start to build. All right, well, we lost that first cavalry battle, and now we've lost another battle pretty badly. Hannibal keeps moving south. Uh-oh. You know, the sort of closer he gets to Rome, the more fearful we become, right? So this will continue to grow over time.
The Romans had expected to be the ones controlling this war. Remember, they thought they were going to invade Carthage.
Right.
Now their plans lay in ruins, and they were levying 11 new legions.
I mean, and you can think about the First Punic War. Now, that was certainly a competitive conflict. It went back and forth. But Rome really held the initiative in a lot of the First Punic War. You know, things were being done on Rome's terms. We can remember one of the frustrations of men like Hamilcar was that Carthage was far too passive. They sort of refused to take the initiative. And it's not necessarily that Rome is being passive here. It's just that Hannibal has really seized the initiative, and he has seized control of the conflict, and Rome is really struggling to take it back.
To deal with the threat, Hannibal had completely redefined the war. But Hannibal had a little problem of his own. Things had gone well so far, but the Celts were notoriously fickle, and Hannibal needed to ensure he maintained their alliance and his base of support in Italy. Any Celts he captured fighting for Rome, he treated extremely well and allowed them to return to their homes. But the longer he hung around in their territory, eating all their food and leaving beard trimmings in their sinks, the more resentful they may become. They wanted to go south and plunder some Roman booty, and Hannibal also hoped to sway Rome's other Italian allies in the south.
Exactly, right? And, you know, you can understand why they're fickle. This is a sort of recently conquered territory. They've been dealing with shifting imperial alliances. They need to be flexible with who they ally with. And so, even with the Carthaginians, Hannibal's just showed up. It's not like they're instantly super loyal to him. Not to mention that, once again, Hannibal is quite cut off from Carthage in terms of supply lines and reinforcements. So he has become very reliant on his Gallic allies for all of those things. And, you know, they're willing to help, but they're like, all right, man, there's only so many reinforcements, supplies, food we can provide you with.
To his side. So from here, the path was clear. Hannibal had to move south. Just one problem. There were two main routes Hannibal could take to move south.
Always the mountains.
And wouldn't you know it, that's exactly where the two new Roman consuls had taken fortified positions. If Hannibal tried to move on them, he'd be fighting from a disadvantaged position and could be bottled in. There is a third option. Ooh, tell me. We could move through this vast impassable marshland flooded with dirty, stinky, disease-infested water that at times would come up to our necks. But there's no way we would attempt that.
Now, come on. What do we know about Hannibal? A couple of things. First of all, he will only fight on his own terms. Do you see him blundering into a battle with the Roman army on their terms? I don't think so. Second of all, presented with a massive geographic challenge, Hannibal will take it on. We saw that with the Alps. I think we're about to see it again.
Right? That'd be crazy, right? Hannibal? Hannibal's 4-day trek across the Arno marshlands was hell on earth.
Yeah.
Almost as crazy as when he crossed the Alps.
Yeah, brutal.
Imagine 3 full days, unable to sit or lie down, because there's nowhere to sit or lie down. Meaning 4 full days without sleep, slugging through heavy mud. You contract cholera, your foot falls off, and Jim Bob directly in front of you won't stop pooping in your path. In fact, everybody's pooping in your path. Some delirious, sleepless men would see clumps of mud and say, man, I could just sink into that. And then they would. When pack animals died, it gave nearby men a chance to rest, but only for a few moments before they were whipped back into line. Even Hannibal himself could.
Yeah, Hannibal will not walk out of this unscarred, but this was extremely, extremely brutal. I mean, just think of yourself in that scenario. I think at a certain point I might just lie down and die. I do not think I have the energy or determination to keep marching in those conditions for that long. This is extremely, extremely brutal. Once again, Hannibal puts himself and his men through these extremely brutal circumstances to get an upper hand on the Romans. Well, it worked out the first time. You know, you can probably guess how it'll work out this time, but it's not without cost to his men and himself, as I reckon we're about to see.
Couldn't escape the torture of it. Hey, Hannibal, if we see a Starbucks, can we stop? We need to take a leak. What? Geez, Hannibal. Looks like you picked up a nasty eye infection. Normally for this sort of thing, we just wash it out with some clean water. But as you can see, water everywhere, but it's full of Jim Bob's poop. No worries, Doc. I'll just take care of it myself.
Yeah.
That'll be $3,000. When the now possibly one-eyed Hannibal and his army emerged from the swamp, they were shattered. But he had just managed to slip 50,000 men right past the Romans into rich Etrurian lands where he could replenish his supplies and his Celt allies could go crazy.
Yeah, there is a lot of big Roman estates here that Hannibal can plunder for crops and supplies and etc., etc.
Securing Roman loot and booty. As fields and villages went up in flames, one Roman consul couldn't help but notice the hot-headed Flaminius, feeling it was his responsibility to protect these lands.
Yeah, and there's a couple of things. You can understand that, right? You see your country being burned around you and, you know, your people dying. It's very understandable to want to get right in there and defeat Hannibal. Also, especially as we move a little further south towards Campania, a lot of important Romans, a lot of Roman senators, they have property in this area. They have big, rich estates that Hannibal will start burning and looting, and as you can imagine, that upsets them greatly. So they want to take the fight to Hannibal immediately so their damn estates can stop getting burnt down, right? So this is really hitting the Romans where it hurts, whether it's from a more sort of selfless, like, I can't stand seeing my country burned around me perspective, or if it's a little more of a selfish, like, hey, you just burnt my estate down type of perspective.
Rather than waiting for his co-consul to come join him, immediately left to go chase Hannibal. Now, this Flaminius was an interesting character.
And I will say, in many ways, that was purposeful from Hannibal, right? I mean, he's doing this because he needs the supplies, but also he knows that it's pretty unbearable for the Romans to not engage him when he's, you know, burning down their countryside and their farms and their estates. So this is also another way to goad the Romans into fighting. Remember, Hannibal is always thinking about his opponent and their mindset.
He was what the Romans called a new man. He came from the lower plebeian classes of Roman society.
And something like the First Punic War would give a lot of opportunity to a novus homo, right? It gives opportunities, especially we saw the amount of people who had died in the First Punic War. That opens up a lot of positions. That gives men who otherwise would not have gotten any sort of authority because, you know, they were a plebeian or whatever, a chance to work their way up. gain important military and political positions. So in times of great chaos or warfare, you do see a lot of these types of new men.
And as a result, he reportedly had kind of a screw-you attitude to the establishment and a big old arrogant chip on his shoulder. Picture Sid Vicious wearing a toga. That's Flaminius. And Hannibal, thanks to his spies, knew everything. Just as with Longus, Hannibal knew Flaminius was just the kind of man he could lure into a trap. Hannibal led Flaminius to the entrance of a narrow pass along the north shore of Lake Trasimene. Flaminius watched as Hannibal's army entered the pass. I've done it. I've spotted the enemy. Sir? That big follow us sign seems kind of like they're trying to lure you in. Yes, Gareth, and I'm taking the bait. Sir, this really seems like a trap. Yes, Gareth, and I'm falling for it. Daylight was fading, so for now, the Romans set up camp.
The classic Roman moment.
Two armies encamped across the lake from one another, and night fell over the two camps. In the morning, Flaminius would catch up to Hannibal, and he would be the hero of Rome. For now, the Romans got nice and comfy in their beds. Good night, Flaminius. Good night, Rome.
Aww.
Good evening, Hannibal.
Yeah, now, wait a minute. Hannibal couldn't possibly be preparing some sort of trap right now. Everything we know about him, that's not what he's doing, right?
During the night, Hannibal ordered total stealth.
Oh, no.
As tens of thousands of troops scaled the wooded hills above the pass.
I mean, look, you see a battlefield with Hannibal on it, and, you know, some bushes or a forest or a gorge nearby. You better check that out, because Hannibal's probably snuck some troops in behind your back.
Completely undetected by Rome's scouts. Let's go, girls. Flaminius took off across the lake shore to try to catch Hannibal. As he did, even...
And, I mean, this is just well, for Hannibal, the best kind of trap. For the Romans, the worst kind of trap. First of all, he has so many men perfectly concealed, and if you just look at the geography, first of all, it's well set up for them to be concealed, and for them to then pounce on the Romans, and then where do the Romans go? This is like a narrow route. What, into the lake? I mean, this is... You honestly couldn't design it better if you had made the map yourself. Hannibal was just fantastic at luring the Romans into, you know, these battlefields that he had selected.
The weather seemed to be on Hannibal's side. A thick fog rose from the surface of the lake, obscuring visibility. Look at this. This is perfect. The mist will obscure our approach. Hannibal will never see me coming. Sir? Why does it sound like 50,000 Carthaginians are charging down the hill towards us? You mean 50,000 Carthaginians are charging right into my trap? Uh-oh. The Romans found themselves completely hemmed in on...
Surrounded again? Classic Hannibal moment. He's got him surrounded. It truly is remarkable when you know, sort of read through or watch content on this period, how many times we see sort of the same thing repeated in different ways. Yeah, Hannibal lays a trap, he lures the Romans in, then he manages to flank or surround them. Alright, repeat that many times.
Both sides, with zero visibility in the fog. The fighting was terrifying and chaotic. Troops were pushed into the lake in their heavy armor, where they were either cut down or drowned. And Flaminius, who likely stood out like a sore thumb in his consul attire, caught the attention of one Celt warrior, with his head possibly swirling with thoughts of how the Romans had decimated his homeland. According to the ancient writers, this Celt took his chance.
Whoa. Damn, look at the animation.
In the 3-hour-long massacre, 15,000 Romans were killed.
Jesus.
And an equal number captured. An entire army completely wiped out, along with their consul. During the battle, the Roman vanguard had managed to break through at the front.
See, now this is another disastrous loss, and these last two have been truly disastrous for the Romans. Right now we're getting to the point where it's not just that the Romans are losing battles, but every loss, they are losing tens of thousands of men, and they're losing important political and military leaders. This is starting to get, like, really, really bad for them.
Climbed the hill above the fog. When the mist cleared, what they saw was a blood-red lake and a sea of Roman bodies.
Jesus.
Worse yet, when the other consuls sent cavalry to try to aid Flaminius's doomed legions, they too were caught and defeated. A double disaster. Rome went into a...
Yeah, so things are not necessarily going great. That fear we've been talking about, yeah, it's really starting to hit now. Hannibal's making his way pretty deep south, and he's starting to look unstoppable. What do we do?
A frenzy. For the second time, Hannibal had completely decimated an entire Roman army.
Yeah.
Romans were dying by the tens of thousands. Common citizens began flocking to the city for safety. Women waited by the city gates in tears, hoping to hear news of loved ones. This one man, having just led his battered army across the Alps the previous year, now stood less than 100 miles from Rome. To this point, he had been a problem. Now, Hannibal was a crisis.
Absolutely.
And in a crisis, Rome took desperate measures. They actually had a system in place when dealing with an emergency of this magnitude. They would forgo their two-consul power-sharing system and instead temporarily give one man near total power and authority to be as decisive as he needed and hopefully salvage the situation. This all-powerful position in Rome's government had a name: dictator.
Yeah, I mean, this is where we get our word dictator from. Of course, these days, dictator has a far more negative connotation. This word did not have a negative connotation in Rome. Now, of course, if you'd appointed a dictator, things were going very, very badly. But they were not thought of as the sort of tyrannical figures we might think of today. And look, I'm not a fan of giving so much power to one person, but the position of dictator did come with certain guidelines, restrictions. You know, you had sort of ultimate authority or close to, but you only had a certain amount of time you could serve, and then you had to give it up. And, you know, I think when people hear that, they go, yeah, right. And sure, sometimes it didn't work out, but you'd be surprised at how many times someone was given the position of dictator and then was willing to give it up when it was over, was willing to walk away from all that power. And maybe it's not even a question of was willing to, but felt the pressure to, was forced to by the sort of Roman political and military establishment, right? So this position, though it's called dictator and it had a lot of power, and that was the idea, it actually was relatively well regulated. Now, once again, it did not always work out, and you know, we'll start to see a trend towards political tyranny in Rome that will result in, shall we say, bad political developments. But just to sort of clarify this, and you know, it wasn't necessarily, it might not be what you're thinking of when you think of the word dictator.
It's actually where we get the word.
Oh.
But unlike...
Maybe I should... I don't even need to talk. He's going to say it all.
modern dictators, Roman ones didn't score perfect rounds of golf or ride bears through the Siberian tundra. They held their power for just 6 months before they were required to give it up.
Exactly.
And in Rome's hour of need, the man chosen to be dictator in 217 BC, one of the most highly esteemed members of the Roman Senate.
Here he is.
Fabius Maximus.
Hey, I told y'all last time, keep an eye on this fella. He's going to be important. And this is only one of the reasons he's going to be important.
So how would Fabius, as dictator, confront Hannibal? Well, Fabius understood that marching all of Rome's young men straight into a one-man meat grinder was bleeding Rome dry. Hannibal was clearly too dangerous to face head-on in battle. However, he was also stuck in their territory, with dwindling manpower and forced to live off the land. It wasn't a sustainable position to be in long-term, and he could only remain there for so long. So, if Rome avoided battle with Hannibal to prevent any more crippling losses, and instead simply maneuvered around him, blocking supplies and taking out smaller contingents where possible, Hannibal would gradually become weaker, while they would gradually become stronger. And so Fabius presented his new idea.
Right. And before we get to the reception of his idea, this is what we call the Fabian strategy. And this is not the first time it was done. I mean, this has always been a big part of Chinese warfare, for example. You know, when you have so much land, you might do what's called trading land for time, where this is also later, we can look at a part of a Russian military doctrine. You know, the idea of, you know, we have land, we have supplies to give, we're going to do that, and we're going to trade that for more time or, you know, for attrition, right? Weakening our enemy over time. So it's not the first time this was done, but Fabius really put it into practice here, and we now remember it as the Fabian strategy. And I think it's largely agreed upon today that this was a pretty well-founded strategy. I mean, nothing is perfect, but I think he was exactly right. You know, Hannibal has been defeating the Romans in all of these battles. Do you want to go up against him again? Probably not. Now, Hannibal's weakness is, as we've mentioned, he is cut off from Carthage. He doesn't have supply lines, he can't get reinforcements in, right? He has only what he has, and then whatever he can forage and loot. So if you can manage to avoid battle with Hannibal, ideally avoiding another massive loss, that means that, one, you can build up your own armies over time, you can strengthen Rome, and you can weaken Hannibal by cutting off his access to these supplies, these resources, and this is sort of a war of attrition over time. Hannibal should grow weaker and weaker, and Rome should grow stronger and stronger, be able to recover a little bit. So I think a lot of people today think this is a very intelligent strategy. Of course, it has downsides, like you're not doing great things for your population or, say, your resources and supplies, because a lot of times this involves burning down your own farms, your own supplies, so the enemy can't get to them, and you're allowing a lot of people to be killed in the process, a lot of civilians in particular. So, you know, there's that, but when you're in such a desperate situation, this is probably the best strategy for it, but I'm sure you can imagine how, you know, this may not have been the most popular, and I think we're about to get to the reception.
Idea to the Roman Senate. Okay, guys, I have an idea. See if you can follow me here, okay? Instead of fighting Hannibal, when he approaches, we run away.
Yeah.
Fabius's strategy couldn't have been any less Roman.
Yeah.
Romans were meant to march headfirst into battle, not run away from it.
Yeah, it was incredibly unpopular, especially amongst the Roman Senate, for a lot of reasons. One of which is that it was seen as very un-Roman, right? I mean, the whole time Rome has been marching straight forward into these battles, intending to just fight 1-to-1. No tricks, no nothing. Now, that hasn't been working, but it's a very Roman way of doing things, right? So it was seen as a very cowardly, you know, un-Roman style of warfare. Also, like I said, there's the fact that, you know, you're going to be losing civilians and your own land to Hannibal, your own resources. That is, one, of course, horrible, and two, it doesn't look very good if you're a Roman politician, right? It doesn't make people very happy. And three, and I mentioned this earlier, especially as Hannibal moves into Campania, which is that rich, fertile territory sort of around Rome, as I mentioned, a lot of these Roman elites have their own estates there, right? They have these massive estates with lots of resources and slaves and crops and whatever, and so, you know, they're saying, Fabius, what you're telling us is that you are going to let Hannibal burn down our farms and take our stuff, or you're going to burn down our stuff yourself to prevent Hannibal from getting to it. You know, what is wrong with you? Yeah, of course we don't want that to happen. So there's a little bit, there's self-interest in there as well. In fact, I think a lot of it is self-interest, either because these people were concerned with their own position or concerned with their own property, right? So the Roman Senate, is not into this idea. It's very unpopular. It's also unpopular among the people of Rome as well, for all the reasons stated, right? It doesn't look very good. You're sort of letting your own people die. It's seen as un-Roman, etc., etc. This idea is not received very well, especially at first. Now, we will see a bit of a turnaround, but it takes some time.
It seemed cowardly, and Fabius was extremely unpopular. At this point, Hannibal was continuing south. He had to stay on the move to keep his army fed, and he was still aiming to undermine Rome's alliances in the south.
Yep.
As he went, in a calculated display of aggression, he devastated the Roman countryside and killed many Romans.
Right,
all
exactly.
in plain sight of Fabius and his army. We're just gonna stand here? Yes. Are you a coward? No. But Fabius, that's my farm. Well, MacDonald, thank you for your sacrifice. You're a hero now. Think of the stories you'll tell. Old MacDonald had... Shut up. But you know who else hated...
Right, and like I said, sometimes this type of strategy can include burning down your own territory. That's not really what Fabius was focused on. That's more of a scorched earth, which is sort of closely related to this type of Fabian strategy. But the big part of this is that Fabius was just letting Hannibal burn down all this territory, knowing that, of course, there's limited supplies, resources. But either way, it doesn't look great when you're just letting Hannibal do these things. Not great for morale, very unpopular, and like I said earlier as well, Hannibal knows this, right? He's always playing into the Roman mindset. He knows that they hate this. He knows that Fabius has got the right strategy, and so he wants to try and undermine it as much as possible. I think, frankly, in my opinion, the best sign, because there's been a lot of debate about this, it was unpopular at the time. Eventually, like I said, there will be a bit of a shift in Rome on Fabius after certain events, but it was very unpopular, and there's been debate since, like, okay, is this strategy acceptable, is it a good idea, etc., etc. I think, frankly, the best sign that this was the right way to go was the fact that Hannibal was so concerned about the Fabian strategy. He was so devoted to undermining it and undermining Fabius because he knew that it presented a serious threat to his chances in Italy.
Did Fabius's strategy? Hannibal. He understood the danger he was in.
Exactly.
Turning Rome's allies against him required Hannibal to keep smashing the Romans in battle. He couldn't do that if Fabius wouldn't fight him.
Right.
Multiple times, Hannibal tried to goad Fabius into a fight, but Fabius wouldn't bite.
Yeah, Hannibal tried his one strategy of draw the Romans into a trap, trick them, and surround them. Fabius, at the moment, is the one guy who's like, I ain't falling for it. And this is very concerning for Hannibal. Very concerning.
Failing that, he tried to turn Rome against Fabius. According to the writer Livy, he burned down all the farms he could, but any farm he learned was owned by Fabius himself.
Right. Yeah.
He left well alone.
So smart.
Hey, Fabius, why isn't he burning down your farm?
So smart. Like, Hannibal knows his opponent, right? He's so good at, letting the Romans see what he wants them to see. So it's just brilliant, right? Fabius has this strategy, which to the Romans looks like complete cowardice, and his estates remarkably are left unscathed. Yeah, convenient, right? This is where conspiracies come from.
You got some sort of a secret deal with him?
What? Of course not. Hey, Hannibal! What? Burn my farm too, please! What? Burn my farm too, please! No! Remember our secret deal!
Well, you got to admit, he's a genius. Hannibal's problem, however, was that he had to stay on the move to keep supplying his army from the local lands. At one point, he entered Campania, one of the richest regions of
this is the region I was talking about, Campania, with all of those wealthy estates.
Italy. Great for resupplying, and great for showing up Fabius in front of Rome's South Italian allies. But he was caught in a valley, and Fabius quickly moved to block his escapes.
Yeah, and, when this happened, it was like, we've got him, Hannibal, we've got him trapped in. He's so good at luring us into traps, but finally, we have got him. He cannot escape. I guess we'll see. Never count Hannibal out. I'll put it that way. Hannibal's going to show us that, yeah, he's pretty multifaceted, He can get out of any situation you put him in, basically.
We've got him. After he's used up all the valley's supplies, he'll starve. Sir? What are all those lights leaving the valley? Is he trying to escape? Lights in plain view. Well, that's a trap if I've ever seen one.
And we're falling for it.
Yep.
Suspecting a trap, Fabius refused to budge. But other Romans in the valley rushed to confront Hannibal.
Yep. So, and this is one of the issues that Fabius faces, which is kind of amusing, honestly, is that Fabius is wise to Hannibal's tricks, right? He's not falling for it. He's like, I am not going to let you goad me into a fight. I know your tricks, Hannibal. Unfortunately, Fabius cannot be everywhere at once, especially in a situation like this where the Romans are sort of spread out over a wide swath of territory. The other Romans will fall for the trap, and then Fabius is still screwed either way. So, unfortunately, even if Fabius knows not to fall for this, a lot of his colleagues do not.
Only to find the Carthaginian army was actually just a herd of oxen with
Yep.
torches tied to their heads.
What kind of Looney Tunes BS is this? It really, a lot of Hannibal's, I call them tricks and schemes, because it feels like the most appropriate word, because a lot of them are like Looney Tunes type shit. You're like, what is this? How did we fall for this? But it works! It keeps working! That's what's so remarkable about it. Honestly, that's one of the things. I mean, look, hey, all warfare is bad. It's all bad. I gotta say, though, ancient warfare, they had a lot more weird schemes and tricks than we have today. And sort of looking at it detached from the human suffering a little bit, you're sort of like, this is like goofy as hell. This is like almost sort of amusing to watch. And you can get sort of schemes like this, which seems like, oh, there's no way that would work. No, it works. It really does.
They then found themselves caught in an ambush. With the Romans distracted, Hannibal's army was able to slip away into the night, unopposed. Classic Hannibal.
Yup.
For all his inaction, the dissatisfied Romans mockingly dubbed him Fabius, the Delayer.
Damn.
But the thing is, Fabius's strategy was probably the best thing he could have done.
Yeah.
He was right that constant encounters with Hannibal were bleeding Rome dry, and the time he took allowed Rome some breathing room to recover their forces when they desperately needed to, while putting Hannibal into an increasingly more difficult position. Modern historians view Fabius's strategy as generally a good idea.
Yeah, and, like I said, of course, it's not a cut and dry issue. There's still debate, but largely, I think, and this is how I view it, people say, it's not a perfect strategy, of course, but considering how Rome was approaching Hannibal before Fabius, this was probably the best thing he could have done. And he did give the Romans a chance to sort of resupply, reinforce, grow stronger. And I think, unfortunately, Fabius's strategy, in the end, it sort of gets spoiled because other Romans can't help themselves from attacking the Carthaginians. But I do think that if Fabius sort of had been able to play this out long term, and, Fabius ain't done yet, but that it really would have led to exactly what he said, which was sort of the decline of Hannibal's force over time, right? They'd run out of allies, they'd run out of supplies, they'd run out of food, they're stuck in this foreign land. I think these are probably accurate assumptions. But, well, like I said, Fabius ain't done yet, and we've got a whole lot more to go of the war. But, yeah, I think, not bad is probably a good way to put it. And, considering what a lot of his colleagues were doing, his fellow Romans, Fabius comes out of this, I think, looking pretty good. Like, yeah, he had the right idea. He could see through Hannibal's schemes and tricks and mind play.
To this day, the act of not engaging an enemy, but instead gradually wearing them down, is still referred to as the Fabian strategy.
Yep.
But when Fabius's term finally...
I don't think that's what they were doing in that control room, that war room, but yes, it is still called the Fabian strategy.
came to an end, the Senate couldn't have been happier. It was time to start fighting again.
Yeah.
However, they probably had a little chat about how they were going to go about it. See, Hannibal's tactics up until now...
Frankly, Fabius is a good example of sort of the Roman dictatorship in that he did have a lot of authority while he was dictator, and he was able to implement his strategy, but no one was happy about it. They were complaining the whole time, and when his term was up, they kicked him out and said, all right, we're doing it our way now. So that is not how we'd see sort of a modern dictator. That is not, all-encompassing power.
Had been very sneaky. Or, if you're a Roman, you might say dishonorable. I'm sick of it. Every time we try to take this guy down, we march straight at him. But then, oh no, Hannibal's hiding in a bush. Hannibal's got 30,000 men up a tree. At this point, I'm not convinced my wife isn't just Hannibal wearing a disguise. Cooey. Look, this time, we obviously have to switch something up.
Right.
Granted, we're Roman, so we're gonna march straight at him without thinking.
Okay.
That can't be helped. It's in our blood. But... I have a proposition.
All right, how are we going to mix it up? What are we going to do differently here?
This time, when we march straight at him, we do it with a massive army. I'm talking like 80,000 men. It won't matter what kind of shenanigans he pulls. He can hide in all the bushes he wants. There's no way he can possibly beat off 80,000 men.
Sorry, what? Huh? Anyway, this is about the most Roman way of going about it. What is the most Roman way of mixing up this strategy of, go straight at them? Just have a bigger army. Like I said, we've talked about the Roman perspective throughout this. They're like, look, we're trained, we are the best disciplined soldiers of the ancient world, they probably believed to themselves, and they were very well disciplined. We're strong, we're well trained, etc., etc. We can beat anybody. So what do we need? We need more men. It's like, okay, what a Roman way of doing things. And that's what they try to do.
You know what I mean? And so it was.
Okay.
With 2 new consuls, Rome put together a massive army.
Yeah.
The biggest Rome had ever fielded to put Hannibal away once and for all. To gather the men required, 2/3 of them ended up being completely inexperienced. But how much experience does it take to be expendable war fodder? As this massive army...
I guess. But, oftentimes we look at the Roman army, the Roman legions, and they sort of live and die on their discipline, their training, that is what's really important to them. And so you have this massive army that is, made up of a lot of raw recruits. It's like, all right, is this really playing to our strengths? I'm not entirely sure.
They set out in the summer of 216 BC. The Romans knew they needed to win this battle. Just one victory over Hannibal would likely be enough to end his entire campaign.
Yeah.
And this time, their overwhelming manpower gave them confidence they could do it. Hannibal had taken position at the town of Cannae, where he had captured an important Roman supply depot. With Fabius gone, Hannibal knew a battle was likely coming, and he was eager to fight.
I'm sure he did say finally. Finally, Fabius actually saw through my tactics. He was actually, he was really bad for me. Finally, he's gone. Let's get back to some more typical Roman generals.
On his terms. But when his men looked out at the Roman camp, they couldn't believe what they were seeing.
Yeah.
That army's huge. There's no way we can possibly beat off all these men. How are we gonna beat off all of these men?
Come on, bro.
You know what I mean. I think he's right, Hannibal. Hannibal is then said to have replied, Gisco, my friend, don't worry. There may be a lot of them, but amongst their ranks, there's not a single man named Gisco. This joke was apparently so funny that his officers began to laugh.
I mean, this is a very well-remembered anecdote. Apparently this was really effective to Hannibal's men. They loved it. I mean, you can see why. Hannibal, I mean, he was a great leader. I think he knew what to say. And so this really got their spirits up.
And laugh. And when his men in the camp heard the laughter, they were like, hey, they're laughing. I guess that means we're gonna win the battle. Yippee! As for the Romans, the consuls were another pairing between an inexperienced hothead and a wise scholar. Although the main historian from this era was good friends with Paulus's family, so take that with a grain of salt.
Yes, I'm glad he pointed this out. The coming events are often framed very favorably for Paulus and not favorably for Varro. But you just pointed this out. The history is very biased, generally, and also in this particular instance. And I am pretty skeptical of a lot of this. It seems to me that this was more of a joint effort than the history reveals to us, right? This is framed as very much like, and the wise Paulus cautioned against it, but Varro just didn't listen. And maybe that is what happened, and there's probably some truth to it, but we have reason to suspect the veracity of this. I think that is very oversimplified. No pun intended. But I think that's a very oversimplified version of things, and probably quite inaccurate and quite unfairly favorable to Paulus.
On his day of command, the rash and hasty Varro, despite the apparent pleas from Paulus, sent the army out.
This is apparently how it went, but and you know, I'm not a scholar of Roman history, right? So I'm not the person to ask, but I think that is probably a misleading framing, as Oversimplified pointed out.
Out for battle. And when Hannibal saw this, he did the same. And here comes the single largest battle of the Second Punic War.
Hey, here we
and
go.
One of the most renowned battles in history.
Absolutely. This is a good one. I mean, we've seen some really impressive victories from Hannibal, but Cannae is probably the most impressive of them all. A battle that has been very well remembered to this day and has been studied, by soldiers and military historians and academics up until the modern day. I mean, this is a really impressive victory. This is a battle of extreme significance, right? So this is a big one.
The infamous Battle of Cannae. In all the pre-battle maneuvering, Hannibal was able to ensure his army was fighting from the south. This meant the seasonal dust-carrying winds were to his back and blowing directly into the faces of the Romans. Like I said, control. After 2 years in Italy, Hannibal's infantry had dwindled to about 40,000. The Romans possibly outnumbered him 2 to 1. Their army was so big that their maniples stretched far deeper than they normally would. The Romans planned to charge Hannibal's thin, weak line.
And I will say, one of the things here is that, Rome has raised this absolutely gargantuan army for the era and beyond. But for this era, this is a massive force of men, and Rome does not really know how to lead this army, right? They're trying to lead it like they would lead an army of about half its size, right? They're not used to dealing with an army this big, which will cause problems. We actually see some similar things if you fast forward, say, to the time of Caesar, but also post-Caesar, the immediate aftermath of his death. We will see these gigantic armies being raised in Rome, and at least initially, the Romans are like, how do we lead these things? I guess we lead them like we always do, but that leads to a lot of organizational problems when you have about twice as many men as you would usually, right? So that is not the main secret to Rome's defeat here, but that's certainly something to keep in mind.
Like a battering ram and break it. They also chose a narrow battlefield in the hopes it would prevent Hannibal's far superior cavalry from being able to outmaneuver them. They wanted an honorable battle where pure strength rather than trickery would decide the outcome.
Yeah.
If Hannibal had his say, however, trickery might end up having a lot to do with it.
As always, I mean, really? That's what you want, Romans? It ain't gonna happen. This is Hannibal. Come on.
He ordered his line to position themselves as an outward bulge, with his weakest troops at the very center. Just behind them, out of sight from the Romans, stood the elite Libyan infantry, waiting for their moment to strike. The battle commenced.
Right, so we can see that Hannibal's army is in this sort of convex shape, and oftentimes the point of this, sort of like a spear tip or an arrow tip or whatever, is to sort of slam through your opponents, right? That might be why you have this sort of shape, but that is not at all what Hannibal is going for, and we will see what he's going for throughout this battle, but it's truly brilliant.
As the massive Roman troops smashed into the Carthaginian center, the shape of Hannibal's line ensured the overwhelming weight of the Romans hit his weakest troops first, and they were pushed back. Hannibal's outward bulge reversed inward, with the Romans being funneled in towards the weak center. Hannibal had positioned himself at the center to encourage the troops to hold out as long as possible against the Roman onslaught, because while the Romans were unleashing carnage on the center, Hannibal's cavalry needed time to do their job. The heavy cavalry on the left, after a barbaric fight, sent the Roman horse packing, with the consul Paulus even sustaining a severe head injury. He managed to move into the center to keep the battle going. Then, the heavy cavalry turned and approached Varro's cavalry from behind. At the first sight of the coming Carthaginian envelopment, Varro ordered his horsemen to flee the battlefield. The Carthaginians had won the cavalry battle.
Right. And this is all incredibly intentional, right? So we started off with that convex shape, right? Outwards. And now it's been turned concave, right? As you can see, it's now inwards, which might appear bad. It might appear like the Romans are pushing through. What you might notice, and what Oversimplified pointed out, is that Hannibal put his weakest men at the center so that they would be pushed back. But he also positioned himself there so that they would hold the line for as long as possible. Okay, so what does that mean? That means that we now have this concave shape, and our cavalry has beat their cavalry, is now behind them, and we have these elite troops to the side. We are perfectly positioned for an encirclement. And, I mean, that's what this battle is so famous for. Hannibal is badly outnumbered, and yet still manages to surround the Romans. It is a classic Hannibal trick, right? Flank or encircle your opponents. But it's so impressive because it's at such a big scale, and it relies upon this little tactic here, right? It relies upon Hannibal's line being pushed back, but not breaking too early. They can break eventually, but they need to hold the line for as long as possible, and that's an extremely difficult thing to do. So this is an extremely impressive execution of an encirclement strategy. This is why it's studied so much, one of the greatest of all time. It's truly incredible.
But back in the center, according to some accounts, Hannibal's line did eventually end up caving to the massive weight of the Romans.
Yeah, it was just too late for the Romans, though. You know, they needed that line to cave way earlier.
And they began to flee. The Romans pushed deeper, and organization within the army likely broke down.
Yeah, right. And so it's only getting, once again, when we think that the idea is for the Romans to push forward or be drawn in, depending on how you look at it, the more the line retreats, the worse it's getting for the Romans, because, these soldiers, these flanking soldiers and the cavalry, Carthage's cavalry, is already prepared to wheel back around.
They became a giant mass, trying to massacre the fleeing Carthaginians. They didn't realize that they were playing right into Hannibal's hands. At that moment, Hannibal's elite units, having done no fighting yet, and therefore fresh as a daisy, turned and smashed into the Roman sides. Many of these troops were wearing Roman helmets and armor they had picked up after previous battles, and the confused Romans may not have even realized they were the enemy. As Hannibal managed to regain the composure of his center and encourage them back into the fight, the Carthaginian cavalry swooped in from behind. And look at what lies before you.
Yep.
A military general's wet dream. The total encirclement of a much larger force by a much smaller force.
Yeah, and that's it. That's what this battle is known for, rightfully so. And once again, it's another encirclement or flanking strategy that Hannibal's done time and time again, but it is the disparity in the number of troops doing it to a numerically superior force, and then also that sneaky little strategy of starting out with your weakest men in the center with this convex shape, and then having them pushed backwards until they eventually do break, but managing to keep order until the Romans are hemmed in, but really hem themselves in. They fall right into this trap. It is this incredible trap. It's such a massive, massive scale.
The Romans were trapped. Hannibal had unbelievably managed to use their own superiority in numbers against them.
Yeah.
Rather than simply encircling them, he had actually allowed them to use their own immense power and push themselves into an encircled position.
Yeah.
This was the genius of Cannae.
I mean, you can see why Hannibal was one of the greatest of all time. If you didn't see it already, you can see it now.
With that, the annihilation began. For hours, the Carthaginians slaughtered the helpless Romans from all sides.
Yeah.
The terrified Romans were so tightly packed that at times they couldn't even lift their arms to defend themselves.
Yeah, this is truly, truly brutal. I mean, this is a massacre of just unimaginable scale, right? Tens of thousands of men being mowed down. Like Oversimplified said, that they can't even defend themselves, you know? Sometimes they can't even raise their weapons. They're squished in. And this massacre goes on for a remarkably long amount of time, and it leads to just a massive scale of death and destruction. I mean, it is, on human terms, it's like a massive human tragedy. There's a massive amount of life lost here.
The killing went on so long that the Carthaginians became exhausted from the non-stop massacre. And by the time the butchery came to an end, the grim toll spoke for itself.
Yeah.
To Hannibal's several thousand lost, the Romans suffered 60 to 80,000 dead or captured.
God.
Yet another entire army wiped out by Hannibal.
Yeah.
Many high-ranking Romans met their end at Cannae. Polis, for one, but also 80 senators.
80 senators. This is an incredible loss of life. It will have a big impact on the Romans, of course, from a psychological perspective. And also, another little tidbit, we sort of talked about this earlier, but when you lose so much of your top leadership, both military and political, that opens up a lot of opportunities, right? Men who otherwise might not have gotten an opportunity now do. And this is key for one man in particular, but I don't want to spoil it yet. And I'm also realizing now that I look at it, we're almost done this video. We must still have one, maybe two parts left. I thought we'd wrap it up in this one, but now I'm like, oh no, we're not even, you know, we're gonna have to wait for part 3. So I won't speak too much ahead, but for one man in particular, there's a big opportunity ahead that this sort of opens up. But yeah, this is absolutely devastating.
And more. It's been estimated that 20% of Rome's male population aged 18 to 50 died at Cannae.
Oh my god.
This was it. Hannibal's vengeance. The stunned Carthaginians, as they searched for their own survivors among the dead, couldn't believe the sight of it. An estimated 30,000 gallons of blood now lay spilled on the battlefield. Rome's defeat at Cannae sent shockwaves throughout Italy. Just as Hannibal had hoped, most of southern Italy now defected to his side, including the second largest city on the peninsula. Wow. Hannibal, this is incredible. What could possibly come next? Next? Jim Bob. I've killed 150,000 Romans. I've turned her allies against her. That's it. That's vengeance. So let me tell you what comes next. Rome surrenders.
Hannibal. Right about so many things, but I will say, I mean, Cannae in particular and all these battles, they dealt a major psychological blow against Roman society. That fear, that anxiety, it was a major blow. But if you know anything about Rome, you will know that these people did not give up. They could be beaten down so much, and yet they would keep on fighting. It is amazing that the sort of Roman martial spirit truly could not be broken. So this has been a massive blow to them, absolutely. And we will see the consequences of that. But the thing is, they are somehow not broken. Now, regardless, this looks really bad for them, you know? If you're standing in the immediate aftermath of Cannae, whether, you know, okay, Rome's not going to surrender, they're unbroken, you probably still think, yeah, I think they're done. Hannibal is destroying them. He's marching through Italy, killing tens of thousands, more than 100,000 Romans. I mean, they are screwed. Now, we'll see how the war goes in future parts, but it ends up a bit differently than that.
Their territories are reduced. We recover our lost islands. And Carthage dominates the Mediterranean once again. But sir, what if they don't surrender? Jim Bob, did you miss what just happened? Of course they're gonna surrender.
Uh-oh.
Throughout his campaign, Hannibal had shown himself to be very adept at reading the Roman mind.
Yeah.
But if he now thought that Rome might surrender, it was the first time he severely underestimated them. And he was about to discover an extremely inconvenient fact about Rome. Rome never surrenders.
Yeah.
At a Roman survivors' camp near Cannae, one young officer overheard some troops discussing how they would flee Rome. Drawing his sword, he threatened to cut down any man that would abandon Rome in its hour of need.
Who's this?
That officer was Scipio the Younger.
There we go.
But soon enough, the Romans would come to call him Scipio Africanus, the hero of Rome.
Oh, wow. There we go. I guess this is going to be a 3-parter. I was thinking maybe 4, but I guess we could get through the rest of it in 3 parts. Or maybe it will be 4. I have no idea. Yeah, there's Scipio. There's the young man I was talking about who would find himself with a wide open opportunity, and he would seize it. Let me tell you. He will be the next major character of our series. But here we leave Rome. I mean, really pummeled into the ground. Unbroken, but in a really terrible state. Though, I wonder if we'll talk about it in the next part. I won't bring it up too much here, because I think we might get to it. I mean, this is absolutely disastrous for Rome, obviously. Things are going really bad on the Italian peninsula, but if you remember, this war is bigger than just Italy. Now, we've been so focused on Italy, which is fair, because that's where Hannibal is, and he's the main character of this one. But the war is going on beyond Italy, and if we turn to other theaters of the conflict, we might find things going a little better for the Romans. And so we can maybe start to understand next time why the Romans don't surrender, why they keep fighting, and how they manage to turn things around. Because as we know, despite all of this, Hannibal does not end up winning this war. The Carthaginians don't win. So, you know, I guess we'll see if those questions are answered next time. But yeah, I had a good time with this one. Like I said, if you'd like to see my future Oversimplified reactions, then check out the Patreon or channel memberships, both of which you can find down below. For the new ones, I like to release them out to the public so everybody can see them. But there's a whole Oversimplified back catalog that I have not gotten through. He has a whole lot of videos that I haven't reacted to, and I would like to go through them and upload them for, you know, paying patrons and channel members. Because, like I said, they get claimed every time I upload them on YouTube, and then if you challenge it, that leads to a copyright strike, and etc., etc. I don't really want to deal with that with every Oversimplified reaction, right? So anyway, you can find that down below. I hope you guys had a good time with this one. I certainly did. I hope y'all are having a good day today, and I will see you again next time. Goodbye.